All right, thanks for tuning in. You're listening to Gaucho Amigos. I'm Alex. Today, my guest is Bill Ware. He's a vibraphone player, a jazz vibraphonist, who played with the groups Groove Collective and the Jazz Passengers. Before that, he's appeared on albums by everyone from Elvis Costello to Debbie Harry and many, many others along the way. And of course, yes, he played with Steely Dan. He was in the band in 1993 and 94 on those first few reunion tours. And of course, he's credited on the 1995 Steely Dan live album, Alive in America. And, you know, I personally became aware of him by watching some of those concert DVDs of 93 shows. You know, if you watch them, there's this guy just killing it on the vibes, you know, taking some big vibraphone solos on songs like Counter Moon and Fall of 92. Incredible performances, just very charismatic with a great sort of showmanship. I can absolutely see what Donald and Walter were drawn to and why they added Bill to the band. Anyway, I tracked Bill down because I wanted to see if he'd be willing to join the pod and talk about his experiences touring with Steely Dan, you know, especially since he was in the band for those great early 90s shows. And we touched base and we did it. Yeah, it was great. Bill liked to talk, had some good stories. Nice guy. And I found out by connecting with him that he's in a band right now called Home at Last. Yeah, writing songs, playing vibes, and even taking lead vocals on a few tunes. And as the name would suggest, there is a Dan influence. So go check them out. I put a link to the album in the episode description. And without further ado, this is my conversation with Bill Ware. Enjoy.
I was in a cover band called Aruba
Okay.
in 1978, 79, I would guess. And we played Peg. And that was just before disco kind of wiped out and DJs kind of wiped out what we call them lounge bands, and you play, and that was our gig, playing in hotel lounges. I didn't know enough tunes to get the gigs in the local bands, and I didn't a lot of the like wedding party type bands, they didn't like black people. They wouldn't hire black people in those bands. And so I started playing Latin music.
Yeah.
On bass, because
Okay.
nobody needs a vibraphone player. Like the very last hired, very first fired.
Yeah.
But so I started. That's how I know. I made a lot of my thing doing that, and the only way I could play vibes was to move to New York. So
You need to
friends of
move to a
mine.
city that had a, big
Yeah, you
jazz.
can't. Not in New Jersey. I mean,
Yeah. Were you a jazz fan also? I mean, would you go into the city to see players or?
My dad was kind of a cornball and very kind of strict, and so he wasn't a hipster at all. He was very kind of a conservative guy in terms of his lifestyle.
Okay.
Not his politics or anything. They were very, very, very liberal, and he was a little bit of a knucklehead when he was younger, so he wanted to keep me out of the taverns, as he called them.
Yeah.
Are you gonna be hanging out with the taverns with your friends, So I don't even think I went into a bar that I wasn't playing at until I was in my 30s. That's how
Oh, wow.
unseen I was.
Okay.
I was just, private person mostly,
Yeah.
And so I didn't get to go to see a lot of really great. Although when I got into high school and I was serious about music, then my dad started taking me places, and we would go uh to the Village Gate. They had the Monday Salsa Beats Jazz on Monday nights. I remember he took me there a couple of times and to see different shows. He started to take me to some shows, but they were really struggling, to try and live in a middle class lifestyle with a lower middle class salary. So and my mom never worked. So my dad was like a single bread owner, so he was always stressed, and money was always an issue. So we were kind of the poorer kids in town, but we entertained ourselves playing music. We had a lot of music in the house. My dad played saxophone, and and like I said, he was a little bit of a knucklehead when he was in his teens, and music kind of saved him. To make that long story short, so he was insistent on everybody playing music in the family. Everybody had to play. You had to play something. My dad was kind of a hoarder, and he had friends who owned junkyards and pawn shops, and so he was always coming home and stuff. So we had one piano, and then we got another piano. So we put one piano in the basement, one piano in the music room, and my sister would take lessons there, and then I would listen to the lessons and get them too in the piano in the basement. Except since I didn't formally study, I would just improvise. So I would be jamming on people, like that Moonlight Sonata by Dato,
So you're riffing on her piano lessons, basically?
Yeah, I would be riffing on her piano lessons. Oh, shit, it would make her really angry because she worked really hard to learn the music, and she was always very, read the music oriented, but I was the ear. I would just learn things by ear and jam. I could jam, but reading music seemed frustrating to me because I heard more than the notes that were on the page.
Wow, really? I think that's good for a jazz player, though, to have that.
Yeah, that's a good skill for improviser for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I could have been more diligent on the reading aspects, but that came sort of later. Long story short, young saxophone player Jay Rodriguez. I met him when he was 14. We played together in a bunch of Latin bands, and over the years, and he was, oh, you got to come to the city. You got to come to the city. So I finally moved to the city, and I was in the city for like 2 months, and we got an offer to go to Japan, for 2 years. So that's how we got the gig. And somebody called me because of the band that I was in. I was in this band, Jazz Passengers. The Jazz Passengers were just starting to make a little noise in this new scene that was happening downtown jazz. People like John Zorn and Modesty Martin and Wood. A lot of tons of actors, Bill Frisell, tons of musicians came out of that downtown scene, the Lounge Lizards. And so I was getting a little reputation from that. And that's how
Did you play with any of those acts?
The Lounge Lizards, I did a couple of movie scores.
Oh, yeah.
Excess Baggage, I think, with Alicia Silverstone was one of the movies he did.
That's John Lurie, right?
John Lurie, yeah. And
cool.
he did some other ones with Jim Jarmusch films that were kind of popular down, underground scene, I guess. But anyway, so that's one of the reasons they heard about me. And then I suggested the bass player, Andy McLeod, and the saxophone player, Jay Rodriguez, my friend who had got me to New York. So they ended up using those when we went to Japan for a bunch of years. Not a bunch of years. They wanted us for a bunch of years, but we ended up doing 3 months. It was a great gig, 7 nights, 6 nights a week, 3 sets a night. And they insisted that we rehearse. They want us to rehearse 5 days, days a week.
That's a
So
lot.
it was a crazy full-time job.
Yeah.
But we ended up negotiating. I think we rehearsed 2 times a week or 3 times a week. So it was an interesting gig. It was a really good gig, and I
Is this in
enjoyed doing it.
Tokyo?
Yeah, no, in Yokohama too.
Oh, okay.
If it was in Tokyo, I would have been like, maybe I will go for 2 years. But it was in Yokohama, which is about 45. It's like playing in Queens or something, I mean, it's about 45 minutes, or Jersey, 45 minutes outside of the city. When we came back from Japan, I wanted to keep the band together because it was so smoking, playing that many nights and playing the same songs. The band was super tight and really good. So I kept the band together, although I changed a few pieces, and then I had a couple of regular gigs. One of my regular gigs was in a place called the Metropolis Cafe. The Metropolis Cafe had a cafe, and they also had a basement that they rented out for different affairs, and they were renting it out to this thing called Giant Step. A Giant Step was a collection, was 2 guys basically, and it was basically of like a floating club.
Okay.
Since they didn't have a main spot, they would just go to different spots, and that was their home for a minute, the Metropolis Cafe. And there was DJs jamming with like rappers and musicians, and it was making this kind of new scene called acid jazz. And so the record companies were all excited that this was going to be the next, they are, next big thing. This is going to be the next thing. So there was a lot of attention to it, and I was playing upstairs in the supper club playing jazz, and I had, on a good night, I had like 40 people. Most of the time it was like 10 to 30 people, like a little tiny jazz supper club audience, and downstairs they had like 800 a line going out the door and around the block. So we're playing our little thing, and of course, horn players being as they are, they got their horn, they can go anywhere, they go down. One guy would go down and jam, oh, you got to go check the scene out. And and that neighborhood, there were a lot of models. So the women at Giant Step was just off
Yeah.
the chain, and they were like, "Yo, you got to come down here, man!" And so one by one, I lost all my horn players were going down there. So eventually, we all went down there. Anyways, some of the guys from this one band called Repercussions, their keyboard player was Donald Fagen's studio manager at River Sound. Donald Fagen had a recording studio in New York, River Sound, and this kid Scott Barkham was his manager. He was the keyboard player for a band called Repercussions. A lot of the musicians that were in the rhythm section at Giant Step were from that band. When my horn players went down and joined them, that was the beginning of a band called Groove Collective.
Okay.
Now, Groove Collective, Giant Step, and Repercussions, they got a record deal with Warner Brothers. And through Scott's connection with Don Fagen, Scott, of course, was connected with their producer, Gary Katz. Gary Katz took an interest in the whole acid jazz scene and brought us to Warner Brothers.
Got it.
So we got a record deal with Warner Brothers.
Cool.
So I was kind of like the last guy, because you can't schlep a vibraphone down through like a crowd of 800 people to sit in somewhere, so that's how Gary Katz heard about me. And when Donald and Walter were looking for a percussionist, Gary said, well, you know what, I got this vibraphone player, and he plays some percussion enough, for what you need. They didn't need Manola Badrena. They just needed a guy to hit boom, to play some simple stuff and not get in the way of anybody. That's the main thing. And because there wasn't that much percussion and there wasn't that much vibes, so they were like, what's he gonna do? Is he just gonna sit there, sit out? Like they were, concerned with that, and they didn't want to have to like write a whole vibraphone book, just for the thing or whatever. So Gary suggested me, and he said, and he's a great soloist. You can have something else, a different solo besides, the occasional keyboard solo and guitar and tenor saxophone. So They like that idea. And amazingly, um, I had one CD that I recorded with the band that came back from Japan. Like I said, I changed a few pieces. I got another keyboard player and
Yeah.
another drummer. I did a record that was making a lot of noise. I got 5 stars and downbeat. Got really good reviews,
Oh,
and they heard that CD and they hired me sight unseen.
wow.
So I got the gig and I was like, what? Wow, it was just such a mind blower to me. Like, oh, because it was the gig, and then I got a lot of work from that because
Yeah.
people like yourself, especially music producers, they wanted to hear the stories because these guys are mysteries. Nobody knew them. If you hadn't worked with them, you didn't know who they were. And their interviews they're so like obtuse with their personalities and their responses. You could sit through an interview and still not know what was happening. So
There was so much mystery around Donald and Walter, especially at this time. This is in the early 90s when they
yep,
hadn't put out an album for 13 years. They hadn't toured that whole time. They had just been, doing the odd project here and there. Finally, they announced 1993, it's happening, the big
yep.
Steely Dan reunion, and you were added to that tour, right? This is what
Yeah,
we're talking, just to
I
make it
mean,
clear.
like I said, I'm kind of I'm not one of the guy who's got the musician paper and reading everything downbeat and all digesting what other musicians are doing. I've always been kind of like a scientist with music.
Okay.
I'm interested in the notes and how stuff is put together, not so much the personalities or what this guy did to get where he it just didn't interest me at all. So
I bet
sometimes to my
Donald and
detriment.
Walter appreciated that about you because they're also very technical, right?
Um, I guess I mean regrettably almost so. I wish I was kind of more outgoing because I didn't really spend much time with them.
Yeah,
Especially now that Walter's gone.
right.
Um, and he was such a cool guy. I wish I had hung out with him more. But it's funny. Like Don, one time they never came to the after show party. After show party, as I quickly learned, because like I said, I never did one of these A-list tours. I was always sort of a B-list kind of guy. You got your A-list bands playing in like arenas and stadiums, and then you got your B-list groups like Group Collective. You may hit that sometimes as an opening act. Like we opened for Dave Matthews across Canada before, and I think me and maybe Chris Potter, because he wasn't that well known yet, but all the other guys, they've been doing that kind of stuff for years.
Yeah,
Peter Erskine, Warren Bernhard, from both those guys from Steps Ahead.
yeah.
Bob Shepard, he was already a known solo artist on Windham Hill.
They had played
Cornelius
with like
Humphreys,
legends and put out
yeah,
albums
toured
and yeah.
with the Doobie Brothers for years. They were all this was their bread and butter. So I was kind of a rookie that way.
So were you overwhelmed by this whole thing? I mean,
Not at all, because
yeah.
when you're young, you're cocky and you think you're better than everybody else anyways. It didn't faze me that much. First rehearsal, right? So they rehearsed the rhythm section first. And I heard this story sort of rumored when I was touring with them, but then I read it later many times, and I didn't realize that at the time. But when they started touring, they didn't have any music. They didn't have any music.
No one had ever like taken the
Yeah,
time to
because
notate
when
it.
you go to the studio, yeah,
Yeah,
you can just sort of make stuff up and just
yeah.
boom, throw it on tape. There it is. What do you need a chart for? You just created something cool, and then You just learn it there by ear, and you jam from there and add a part here, add a part there. I could easily sit in my studio and play around with something, not even know what notes I'm playing, and have like the whole rhythm section done and everything. I'm like, oh, wait a minute, what key am I? Now I better make a chart because I have no idea what I play. And that's the way, in the studio you can create like that. And they had all this stuff, and all the charts. I'm sure they had charts at the time, or your sketches or whatever. That's all gone.
Right. They
So
didn't, they
they
lost it
had to
or
actually
it got,
hire people to transcribe and write
wow.
charts. We had a guy there with a computer. He was chart man, and you
Well,
wanted
it's
a chart this
also,
way or that way, he was
yeah.
right there with the computer and make new charts of the stuff. I still have my book, but anyway, so they rehearsed the rhythm section for, I don't know, 2 weeks or 3 weeks or something like that. So the rhythm section, drums, bass, two pianos, um, two guitars. Uh, they rehearsed for 3 weeks, So then I got added in with everybody else, with the singers, the background singers. Donald rehearsed also separately with the background singers, so they were already rehearsed. And then finally the big full rehearsal, adding the horns, me, percussion, and everybody all together. So, like I said, they had rehearsed this group and that pieces of it, and now we're putting it all together for the first rehearsal. And the first tune we played was Green Earrings, I think, right? And that's
Yep.
boom, ba da da, chicken boom, ba ba ba, ba ba ba, right? Da 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 da, cold, ba ba ba. Okay, Donald says, okay. So the thing about this groove, and I've gone over this all with the rhythm section, and I think it was actually, I was the only one that, me and the horn players are the only ones that hadn't worked with him, but I'm the only one in the rhythm section. So he would say things to the whole band, but I'm thinking, well, I'm the only one that hasn't heard this. So why doesn't he just say it direct? But yeah, that's the way it was. They never really talked to me that much. Um, uh, so
So they would
yeah,
never address you directly. It was more like they would
no,
say,
no, not well, not really. At that
yeah.
point,
Okay.
certainly not. Because this is the first song of the first rehearsal.
Okay.
So he says, the thing about this is like the spaces, and this was like whenever Donald said anything, I remembered everything he said because it was so poignant and so like it was like a revelation. Like, holy shit, I never thought of that. It gave me a whole nother respect for for other artists other than jazz. Like,
Really? So he was imparted a lot of wisdom to you, even,
oh yeah, because he had such genius ideas, small
wow.
but genius. Like I just never thought of that. Like, and he was like, the spaces in between is almost more important than the note. Like, even if you miss the note, don't land in the spaces because that's where the groove is created that I'm trying to
Mm,
create. So it's like, wow, that's really cool. So we would play things like on that tune, one, nothing on one, space, dun dun dun,
right.
space, dun dun dun, space, dun dun dun, space. And you could see the way he would move on the piano. That's exactly what he was feeling and hearing, and it was really cool. That was like, wow, okay. When you're in presence of brilliance. So cool, got it. All right, here we go. So Donald counted off, one, two, one, two, three, four. Now I was really into like playing with Groove Collective. I was really starting to dig on a lot of really cool funk because I had never really spent a lot of time doing funk. And when I want to play music, I want to immerse myself in it and really see everything that it's all about, right? So I was listening to a lot of funk. James Brown was like a master, and met him and everything, and
Cool.
and uh, he really has these great interlocking parts. So we start to tune it. I'm like, it's not happening. It's too heavy on that. So I start hitting the one. Banging it, banging it, banging it. We get about 16 bars into the tune, Donald. Oh, Bill, don't put anything on the one. Oh, really? All right. I thought that part was really happening. You look cocky, right? And everybody else is like, oh my God, he's not even gonna make it through the rehearsals. He's gonna get fired. Right? So, okay, we start the tune again. I'm like, try this corny part. China, China. We make about 16 bars, and Donald goes, Bill, go back to what you were doing. I was like, yeah, I thought so. That was it. He never said another thing except there was one part I kept missing. It's in it's in one of the Kamakiriad songs when the song about driving in the car.
Trans Island Skyway.
No, not Trans Island Skyway. I was thinking that too, but
Oh, Tea
no,
House. Tea House on the tracks.
yeah, Tea House on the tracks. We hit the spring ting just at dawn. I would miss that every fucking time. I couldn't believe it. Oh, every time I missed it, I just, I had to like drop what I was doing and get the spring and be ready, and I was always spacing on the words. And that part, I remember he reminded me a couple of times. I think I missed it. And I always like when I'm goofing around with people, I say that spring, that got me fired. That's why they didn't hire me again, because I kept missing that one. They hit the spring just that dawn. The most important note I hired me for, and I missed it every time. At one point, I remember the Madison Square Garden show. The music director, Drew Zing, came up to me and he was like, oh, we're getting complaints from the other musicians about you. And oh man, that I had never experienced anything like that in my entire life. I was so hurt. I was like, I was ready to quit. And then I was like, what are you kidding? You can't quit. That's nuts. No, nobody just quits like a gig like this. Just grin and bear it. All right, they don't like you. You're used to that.
Well, as long
So
as you won Donald over, I think that was the most
yeah, that
important
was
thing.
the thing. And then the next, I expected to either be fired or something. So the next sound check, and the Drew came up to me before the sound check and said, "Don't worry about that. Just forget about it." Part of the complaint was is that I would smoke pot in the dressing room, and so they addressed that by making a smoking room. And since I was the only one in the band that smoked, it was like having my own private dressing room. Everybody else was in there. Donald was in his room. Walter was his room, and I think the singers had their room for the ladies, and I had my room. It was such a triumph. And it's like, yeah, you don't like it? Screw you. And so that
and
that that was pretty cool. And then I was cool for the rest of the gigs. And he never said anything. I just made my own parts up, and I really like those little counter rhythms. You don't hear that many of them on the record, but one that sticks out really loud is, besides my solos and the actual vibe parts that were essential parts, like in Asia,
right.
ting, 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 ting. And then Shining Stranger,
Right.
it has that real part that was actually in
You had
the
like a
record.
long intro on Sign and Stranger, right?
Yeah, that was my feature. That was one of my
Yeah.
features. That a couple of one Walters tunes, that one, and the ending of something.
Well,
One
you
of the
did
songs.
a Fall of
Solos.
'92.
Yeah, Fall of '92. That was one of my
Yeah.
features.
I have a couple bootlegs from those years that I've listened to. And I actually did an entire episode on one of them with like two other guys where we just talk about the live Steely Dan experience. And we talked about your parts. Like
Cool.
we all
Yeah.
enjoy your vibe playing. So anyway.
Yeah, it was certainly a lot of fun, and like I said, a great learning experience. I love the way Donald will he has a whole I don't know if you've seen at the time this was really big, was guys putting together um video about their method, and Donald had one about how he writes a song. And everything starts with a blues. Every single song he writes starts with the blues. So you sort of like find that groove and then move to the four chord like you do in a blues.
Right.
And then he goes from there. The song will grow, from there. And then he'll once you have the melody zeroed in, and he'll try this chord, that chord, this chord. Okay, that's the normal way. Okay, let me see how far away from that I can move. And I use that compositional tool today
Oh, really?
when I write for especially I'm writing for this rock band Home at Last now. And when I write stuff, that's one of my main processes, especially for popular type music, or even for my jazz. Don't just go for the standard, okay, the standard chord, see what else makes that melody, because then that chord may influence the next chord. If you come up with something, a hipper chord here, whatever follows that now will suddenly sound different to you, and you'll find yourself really coming up with some great harmonies. One of my favorite exercises in college, as a matter of fact, was that very thing, was taking a melody, take a very well-known melody, and come up with 10 different harmonizations for it. And I remember I picked Oh Susanna, which is super easy to and I was surprised. It was when I started the exercise, I was like, this is dumb. Like, what's the point of this? And when I started doing it, I was surprised at how many different ways you could harmonize it, and how many different feelings you could give it: a happy feeling, a sad feeling, a surprise feeling, just by changing the harmony. And that I think that's what I love about Steely Dan the most, is the inventiveness in the harmonies. They don't just go for the standard thing. They go as far away from the standard thing in every word and every chord.
Well, that's what makes it pop or stand out. It's just like,
that's what makes it so rich, really.
yeah.
And that and the rhythm. I mean, Donald is the feel meister. I can tell in this story. Here's another one of my favorite stories.
Okay.
One time at rehearsal, we were playing one of Walter's tunes, I think. It might have been Fall in 92. It was one of the slower ones. It was like 90, funky, look down tempo, funky stuff that they do. And Donald said, yeah, it's such a sound check, actually. Last night, it felt a little sluggish to me. So I thought we'd run over that in sound check. So the night before, I don't remember exactly, I think it was 93 beats per minute. So let's try 94 beats per minute. So we played the whole song. Let's try 95. Play the whole song. Let's get crazy. Let's push it up to 97. Play the whole song. It's too fast. Let's try 95 again. 95. Play the whole song. Now let's go back to the way we had.
Wow.
93. I mean, really feel Donald just like, he really like feels the shit.
Yeah. So is
And
that incremental?
that was another revelation to me, knowing the feel of things that acutely. And then another example was one night. It was after sound check, and it was kind of like when you do shows, you have the notes, the notes the day before the next show, you run over the notes from the night show before,
Yeah.
and that was always the sound check. It was kind of like the notes of the show before, and if there was anything that was weird, they would go over it. So Donald says, when we played, it was like Black Friday, I think it was. We
Yeah.
played Black Friday last night. Sure felt weird to me. He said it's like not moving. It was not, I don't know what it was, but it didn't feel good. And Peter said, oh, I think that was probably me. And Peter Erskine had this really super fancy, especially at those days, it was super fancy click track thing that he could program the click for each tune, and I guess press one button and go, okay, here's reeling in the ears, boom, and it would have his click track all set up.
Got it.
And what he would do was he would have it going and then 1, 2, 3, 4. Once he started the tune, it would stay in for about 16 bars till it was solid, and then drop out, and then it's on him. That night, for that tune, I think it was Black Friday, he left the click on for the whole tune. Donald was the only one who noticed.
Wow. And Donald picked up on that.
Oh, he noticed it.
He couldn't put a finger on it, but he felt something.
Yeah, he couldn't. He just didn't feel right. It wasn't like something. I don't know what it was, but I can't. And that's what it was. Peter was like, "Oh, I think that was me." And that's when I was like, "Wow, this guy."
So he was so acutely aware of the subtle difference.
Yeah.
Sensitive.
Some masters like that, they are super. I saw something today. We're talking about Butch Morris. I don't know if you heard of Butch Morris. He was one of the downtown kind of guys, avant-garde. He invented this thing called conduction, where he can have improvisation happen by this whole method of cymbals and hand cymbals and baton use to improvise an entire orchestra. So it's quite an amazing thing to be a part of. And he was another cat like that. I mean, hear everything, feel everything. If you move your leg to the left, like he was just aware, so acutely aware musically. It's so wonderful to be around musicians like that. And I try and emulate that. I don't know if my talent is that great, but that's definitely something that I aspire to be on that level. I think they have a term for guys like that in the studio in Germany. I worked with a guy who was like that, and they call them Meister singers. And they're the guy in like a recording session that, like, for symphonic orchestra or a big band, I mean, they can handle 30 pieces, and they're the guy that sits above the main engineer and knows everything that's happening, every single microphone, every single instrument, every single sound, everything that's happening on the board for the recording, every assistant, he's in charge of it all.
Yeah.
And they got they're also called golden ear because they're just so 20 to 20 and beyond hearing wise. They every little thing. And it's just so amazing to work with people like that.
So Donald was like essentially like conducting you guys like an orchestra almost, right? Would you say that's accurate? I don't know.
At rehearsals, for sure, he called all the shots pretty much. He sometimes he would confer with Walter on, this or that little detail or something, but pretty much, even though they kind of had the first year they had Drew as supposedly the musical director, but I think he was a buffer in case there was any,
Why did they drop Drew after 93? Do you know?
I don't know. I guess to have a different flavor in guitar. Some people didn't particularly like Drew style. He's a phenomenal guitar player and musician.
Yeah.
He reminds me of like some of the Cuban musicians. I mean, the guy I never saw him without his guitar. He had this little practice setup that with like a multi-track system, which like in 93, that was, a portable little practice thing where he could plug his earphones in it and play along with music. That was kind of, high tech, but he was always practicing, just always playing. The guy was just, I mean, he could play the original guitar solos. He had them all the original solos memorized, and he could play them, with the same proficiency as the original. I mean, the guy is just sick as a musician. It's just ridiculous. I mean, I don't know. If I had a guy like that in my band, I would hold on to him forever. But these guys are, whatever. I don't know. Eventually he settled on a band. But I guess, if you have the money and the ability, and you had the record company behind them, so they're feeding in some extra money, and because they were trying to push these guys and make it just like give them everything they want so that they're so excited about touring that. And I guess it worked, because Donald's still at it. Um,
Yeah, I
uh,
saw that Drew Zing is actually doing some sort of Steely Dan
yeah,
cover
yeah. I
project.
saw that out in
Yeah,
California.
yeah.
But he was so ridiculous. But
And then Wadenius comes in '94. How was he?
yeah, George George was more of a little less, I don't know, technical, as I
Yeah,
guess some people would say, and a little more, I don't know, soulful, a little more ear, a little less um pattern stuff, and a little more ear loose, to me, a looser kind of feel. Great guitar. I used him on some of my on one of my projects. We did the Fez, we recorded together, and he recorded a song called The Rain. He just had the music,
yeah.
sight reading it, looked it over. Okay, yeah, let's roll the thing, and I'll practice with it. So I told the engineer, record this. He did a practice run and killed it. And he goes, okay, so we can do another one, and then I can go back and fix stuff if you want. I was like, you're done. That was brilliant. Don't touch it. I just love that first performance where you're, reaching for stuff, and he was kind of like that kind of guy. Like he could just pull that off, pull stuff off. And
Yeah.
I love that quality.
How was Walter? I mean, what were your impressions of him?
Um, Super smart, super observant. Nothing went unnoticed. One of my favorite examples is we're playing at the George in Seattle, and George, Washington, the Gorge in George, Washington. Fantastic place. As a matter of fact, they used the shot from that for the back of the album cover, Alive in America. So that's the George from a view of the stage, because
Yeah.
behind they use for this backdrop, you have the gorge there. Beautiful. It looks almost like a green Grand Canyon. And then you play during sunset. So that's the backdrop. It's just a brilliant idea and really cool. And I have some relatives in Seattle, and they were at the show, so I was all excited about that. And it was super hot. And some of the stages we played on when it was hot, like Arizona, they had an outdoor air conditioned stage. I can only imagine how much energy that's wasting. But it wasn't there, and it was super hot. And I remember, and I had this skimpy, I would wear vests with no shirt, because I like to have my arms free to play percussion. And I played
Yeah.
congas, and I had a whole percussion rig from LP, with wind chimes and cowbells and lots of tambourines and all kinds of little noisemakers, all that kind of stuff, toys. Um, so I'm jumping around a lot, and in those days, I played. I stood and played. uh, so I'm dancing around and jumping around back there, and it's hot. So I I had planned to wear this really skimpy vest and shorts, and I think I had these sandals that I mean Birkenstocks or some sandals that I was
Yeah.
wearing. And when we're hanging out in the dressing room, and of course I'm really super stoned. My cousin was there; he had some killer ass weed, and super stoned. And it's time to do the sound check. So I go out on sound check, and I realized that the t-shirt that I had on and underwear that I had wasn't that much different from what I was going to wear in the show. So it's a goof. I just went out in the show in my underwear. And of course, Walter, who does not miss a trick, I said, they're not going to notice. Nobody even notices me back here.
Yeah.
And Walter introduced me to the audience as the scantily clad Bill Ware of percussion. So that guy, he's just cool as can be, looking around, but don't let that cool misdemeanor demeanor fool you, because he sees everything and knows a very what a, he would always make these, he would introduce the band, it was, the format was pretty much the same. We do this overture, which was a written overture, a bunch of the songs like a show overture, with the hints at all the different songs and some songs that we actually didn't even play.
It was like a medley of
a medley of
Jan
songs, basically,
Mm-hmm.
Um, what da 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 da. It started out with that from what's that
Royal
Third World
Scam.
Man? Yeah, Royal Scam, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
We didn't play Royal Scam. We played Third World Man, but it was sort of built off of Royal Scam. So, and they got to hint at tunes that we actually weren't on the set list and everything. It was a cool idea. And then the second set would start out with this jazz rock composition by one of Warren Bernhardt's friends called Tuzz's Shadow. So every show would start at that, and they introduced we do, I don't know, 3 songs, and then Walter would introduce the band and talk. And so he would always have some quip to say about, and we always talk about, we introduce the saxophone players and always say, we have no kazoos, no trombones, no trumpets, no sousaphones, no kazoos, no penny whistles, no nose whistles. We have tenors every night. It would be some little different spin on that, but basically the same format. And he would always introduce me with some, little quip that would happen. And that was that one. And like, my feature was Sign and Stranger.
Yeah.
Intro to Sign and Stranger. They stretched that out a little bit and gave me a solo in there because they were trying to find spots for me to solo. I was getting a lot of good press. Me and Drew got a lot of good press too.
Yeah.
Even a lot of the critics were panning the show because they're just rehashing their hits. Well, duh, that's what people want to hear, you idiots. But anyway, critics, what a joke. So I figured, Sign and Stranger, I'm not even sure what that song is about.
It's a science fiction song. It's about a guy on another planet on Mizar 5.
Right. But what it's really about, But anyways, I just, Sign in Stranger. And I always thought, I'm a note guy. I'm strictly a harmony note guy. I know 12 things. I always say C sharp, D sharp, E, F. So how can I make this really signature Sign in Stranger solo? So I decided to start my solo. It's like a C7 groove, It's over a C7, That's the basic chord behind and that intro where I solo over. So I decided, well, what's the strangest note that I could possibly play in a C7 that'll sound good? And it's either B natural or C sharp. So I would always start on my solo, wham, right, just with a loud octave roll, C sharp, and then go into my solo. Sign and Stranger, like strange note, bam, and then let that launch my solo from there. I won't plan out whole solos, but I'll give myself a launching point, and maybe an ending point or something like that. So, and then I expand on that, maybe make it A over C or do some kind of harmonic, and modulation scheme off of that, but always with that. So he introduced me as Bill Ware, who starts a solo. When he starts a solo, he starts out and works his way back in. I was like, that's just like, that was Walter. He really could understand stuff quick and digest it deeply, like he wasn't a little surface guy,
and you wouldn't see him necessarily really showing that he was taking notice.
No, totally the opposite. The opposite. Like the guy in the corner who looks like he has no idea what's going on, and he's actually running all the shit, he's one of those dudes.